Father, thank you, Lord, for this opportunity tonight to thank you for getting our equipment over there to the IDF and got there safe and sound. And thank you for providing that way, and thank you for the men that took it over there and are now there helping in that area. So continue to bless them, keep them protected, keep Israel protected. And as we study tonight, Father, teach us. Fill us with your Holy Spirit so we understand your word and can apply it. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so I've done the church of Ephesus, and we talked about the reward there with the tree of life. And now I want to move to the Pergamos church. I've done Smyrna already when I did the crown of life. So I've already done Smyrna, so I'm jumping over Smyrna and I'm going into Pergamos. There'll be some unpacking there a little bit because it's pretty in-depth historically. A lot of things started happening to the church. And to know the history is to know what you have to overcome, okay, in the church of Pergamum. So he first starts off to the angel of the church of Pergamos. Pergamos, the name in Greek means thoroughly married, okay? And so there's not a mistake and an accident that the name of the church of this era, which dominates AD 313 to AD 600, this is when the church now has been made in the Edict of Milan the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. And Christianity now is the number one religion because of Constantine, okay? And it dominates the era. So you would think that would be great because all the persecutions have stopped, but actually it creates compromise. It creates an unholy wedding, an unholy marriage, an unholy union with the church or the believers with the pagan world of its day. So we have to keep those things in mind. One of the things he says, these things say he who has the sharp two-edged sword. This is not the same dagger-like sword, or I shouldn't call it a sword, but a small Roman short sword that was referenced in Hebrews chapter 4 that can pierce into the soul and spirit, right, and reveal the heart and the intents of the heart. It's not referring to that one. This is a rhomphaia. A rhomphaia is a very long sword, very, very long. It's kind of like one of those Braveheart, swords with real long and heavy and stuff like that. That's a rhomphaia. So when he says, he who has a sharp two-edged sword with a rhomphaia, he is not talking about piercing into the soul and spirit to penetrate the heart and to get truth to it. He is talking about, I'm using this to beat you over the head with it, to crush you is the idea. That's what you would do with this long rhomphaia sword, is the Messiah saying, I'm going to crush you with it if this is not overcome. So it's a big warning, and this is why in church history, a lot of bad things started entering into the church at this time. So you can see why Christ himself is angry at what's going on here. He says, I know your works and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. So at that time, Satan's had his throne there, spiritually speaking. So the concept of Satan's throne needs to be understood, and it's kind of an ancient concept. It moves around. Satan's throne moves around to wherever he wants it to be, but it typically is centered around his mystery cult aspect. So let me explain. The first man-made religion obviously came from Satan's inspired knowledge of occultism to Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel and built a lot of other cities as well, Nineveh and whatnot. He built Babylon as well. And so obviously under Nimrod is an antichrist type of figure. He united all the world together under one language. You recall that. And let us build a tower unto the heavens. You remember that. And it's not a tower in the sense of a spiraling tower. It's a ziggurat. That's what we know of what they were building, which is a counterfeit of the mountain of God that God is on and heaven is on. New Jerusalem is on, by the way. And so what you had is Nimrod making a counterfeit mountain, and that's what a ziggurat is. It's a pyramid type of structure, and steps to the top, and on the top is a place unto the heavens, or to the stars, or to the gods, so to speak. And what they did in the ancient world is they thought behind every star was a god, a specific god. And really, they were fallen angels is what they're worshiping. So anyway, they made this tower unto the heavens, where now we have the first instance of man-made religion being foisted on the entire population and being forced on it by a threat of fear. And the fear is the mechanism in which Nimrod gathered everyone together, and the fear was driven by a kind of the propaganda that you kind of see today, to where he said, look, let's build a tower unto ourselves, let's come together lest we be scattered, right? Which is in direct opposition to what God wanted. God said they'd be scattered, spread out, form other nations. And so through the propaganda of fear, and it probably went something like this, that if we scatter, we're going to be vulnerable, wild animals will kill us, we're stronger when we're together, we're stronger as a collective, we need to be together and look for the best for the collective. That's where collectivism comes from. Instead of going out, spreading out, and individually being responsible for the area and your life, they decided to be victims, because one of the back channels in propaganda that came out, a lot of the rabbis would say this, and even Josephus says it, that Nimrod was basically saying, yeah, we don't want to be scattered because he could do another flood again. And we don't trust this God because he killed everyone else in the flood. So they made God to be the bad guy in the flood narrative, right? And so, we don't want that happening again. And so he's not a God that you can trust. So let's clump up together and we'll make a name for ourselves. So that way he can't destroy us anymore. So it was a total opposition to God and making God the bad guy. They switched the narrative, basically. And obviously they do that today, right? They flip the narrative on everybody. But notice that it's the same thing, that we're going to clump together through fear. Okay, so that's the Tower of Babel. So what happens is man-made religion is created there. And this on the tops of these ziggurats, what we know from archaeology and history is what they were doing on the tops is they were trying to create a portal between this world and the spiritual realm. The portal that would allow the spiritual creatures from that realm to come into our physical realm, and us to transverse from the physical realm into the spiritual realm. So a portal, as they call it in witchcraft or Wiccan or whatever you want to call it. But definitely a portal that we could tap into. Much like what CERN does, with the particle accelerators that you see in Switzerland, where they're doing things that are really weird and possibly opening portals, and they hear voices and they hear messages coming out of that, and they don't know where it's coming from. Well, it's possibly they're tapping into the spiritual realm. That's where they're hearing these voices from. So, with that being said, what flourished there is what we call the Babylonian religion. And it's centered around Nimrod. Okay, so then what happened historically? Well, what tended to happen in the ancient world is they would worship, well, let me back up. They wouldn't worship necessarily, they would hyper-venerate their ancestors, okay? So, they hyper-venerated Adam and Eve, by the way. And you can even see this in kind of Greek mythology, where you have these semblances of Eve, for instance. And there's a statue, and I can't remember the goddess' name. I'm going blank. So anyway, the Greeks had this goddess, and she was opening Pandora's box, and she was dressed in scales of a snake in this picture, of this statue. And you know about Pandora's box, right? That once it's open, it just goes crazy. And this particular god was a woman that had serpentine scales on her. And if you really looked closely, what you were really watching is a hyperveneration of Eve, because Eve was the one who introduced Adam to eat the fruit and plunge us all into sin, Adam and Eve. But it was corrupted in the story of Pandora's box, if that makes sense. So you'd have these corruptions of truth. And so even with Nimrod, what they started doing with Nimrod, and we believe Nimrod was a Nephilim because he's called a Gibborim, which is the same term that was given to Goliath, and Goliath was a Nephilim. So there's the theory that Nimrod was half human, half angelic. Okay? So anyway, what ended up happening with Nimrod is he began to be worshipped along with his wife and along with his son. And he was a mighty man of renown, okay? So that was the term given to the Gibborim, like these Nephilim creatures in Genesis chapter 6. And so he was famous for this, right? And what developed around him was this worshiping of him, his wife, and his son, a tripart type of Godhead, if you want to call it that. And then the legend had it that the son named Tammuz was attacked by wild animals and killed, and then he was resurrected from that attack. And so very similar stories to what the Messiah would do, right? So what all developed around that is called the mystery religion. And this is the Babylonian religion, and it's called a mystery religion because the mystery is the idea that the priests know what the mysteries are of the occult, and they're the only ones that can tell you what these mysteries are of the occult. But in order to get those mysteries, you have to pay for it. And so the mystery cults of the Babylonian religion is one in which if you wanted secret knowledge, if you wanted to know beyond the grave what was happening, you wanted to know the future, you wanted to know all these things, necromancy, all that junk, right, of the occult, you went to a Babylonian priest and he could reveal the mysteries to you. And that's what occult means, it means secret knowledge. And so this whole mystery cult developed there in Babylon. And it stayed there for a very, very long time. In fact, it stayed there all the way until Israel comes into Babylon through the Babylonian exile in 596 BC. So this is how strong that religion stayed there. Now, if you go to Revelation 17 and 18, it will talk about the harlot and that she is the mother of all false religions, basically. And so it's a reference to Babylon. That the fountainhead of all false religion came from Babylon, obviously satanically inspired. But there it stayed in Babylon for a long time. And hence, this is where theologians say that's where the seat of Satan was for a very long time. So then it moved after that. Okay, what precipitated the move? Well, what precipitated the move is the Babylonian exile of Israel. They get taken into exile, as you know. They're there under Nebuchadnezzar, under the Babylonian reign. And then Belshazzar makes a big mistake, if you recall. And he drinks and has a party with the temple vessels. And then that night, the Medes and Persians take over, and they go under the walls. And they take Babylon without even a fight. And the reign of Persia takes over. Okay? If you recall, there were four really main characters in that exile that we look at. And there's the prophet Ezekiel and Jeremiah before that. But really it's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are your main characters in the book of Daniel. And as you know, they lived through both reigns. They lived through the Babylonian reign, and the end of that comes with Belshazzar. and then the Persians, or Medes and Persians, take over, and Daniel is still alive at that time, and he's an older man. And that's when he gets thrown into the lion's den as an older man, right? But something changes after the lion's den, if you recall. After the lion's den, and he survives that, they promote Daniel to be like the head of the magicians, the head of the school of the Magi, okay? So here's where the conflict happens. The conflict is now a biblical character is becoming a head of the school of the occult of the Magi. And again, it's conjecture, and I think it's a good theory because it moved after this. So what we saw in history is the Babylonian cult that was in Babylon moves and leaves at that time of Daniel and gets out of there. So the theory is that when Daniel became head of the Magi, he cleaned house and kicked them all out, right? And at that point, he would be in a very powerful position. Again, this is how the theory goes. A very powerful position to kick these jokers out, these occultists, and they fled, right? Because he's taking over. There's no one higher than Daniel other than the king, right? I think he's second or third in command or as high as the level as an administrator, and he's head of the school of religion. So he comes in, cleans house, and this explains historically while the seat of power moved. And where did it move to? Well, it moves at that time from Babylon to Turkey. And then primarily it settles in Pergamum. So the seat of Satan, Satan's throne, moved from Babylon to Pergamum. And so in 95 AD, you can see, I know your works, where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. So at this time, Satan's throne is right there. Okay? And why is that significant? Because it is from this launching point in church history where the mystery cults will enter into the church. So as we can see, Satan moves his throne wherever his center of the Babylonian religion is, or the harlot is. So that's why you see this interplay in the book of Revelation with the harlot and the Antichrist and the 10 kings, and the 10 kings use this harlot. This harlot system's nothing new. It's a religion that Satan cooked up, implemented by Nimrod, and basically the way you want to understand it is the exact opposite of morals than the Bible. Okay? It's just whatever God says is true, it says it's false. If God says this is false, it says it's true. It's a total inverse. So the horror is this religious system that's with us and will be used right now to garner the glue that unites the governments of the world and the commercialism of the world into one global, technocratic, one world government, whatever you want to call it. But it has to have a glue. And the glue is this Babylonian religion that was started with Nimrod under Satan. So this church is there, and so this church is a compromising church. It marries with this Babylonian religion. And so all of a sudden, during this era, in 313 to 600 in the church era, all kinds of junk starts entering into the church that comes straight from paganism. And I've briefly talked about a few things, like the different clothing for the clergy, prayer beads. The prayer beads came straight out of Babylon. The actual clothing, the clothing that they wore came from the Babylonian cult religions. It came from the courts of Rome and stuff. That type of wear that they have, right? And you're like, how did that get in? Well, because they were compromised. See, here's the problem. If the church shakes its hand with the state you're going to get into a lot of mess. And that's what Constantine did. He married the church with the state. And you think, well, that's a good thing. Well, it's not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, there's no more persecution, okay. But then a more insidious thing comes in there is false doctrine. And doctrine that actually comes from Babylon, right? So you get prayers, instead of being prayers for these different deities, you have prayers for saints, okay? Stuff like that. Prayer beads turns into a rosary. Just weird stuff. Now, here's the funny thing, and I'll get to some specifics, but here's the funny thing. When you marry the 7 churches with the parables of the mystery parables in Matthew 13, they will explain a little bit more for you. So take the 7 churches and put them on one ledger, and then take the 7 parables in Matthew 13 and marry them together. Okay? And what you'll get is a further explanation of more of what's going on in that particular church. Okay, so what's going on in the parables, the mystery parables that Christ gave? What's the parable that matches Pergamum? It's the parable of the mustard seed. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. Okay, real simple, but again, talking about the kingdom of heaven, or if you want to, well, let me explain this a little bit further. Which indeed is the least of all the seeds. So it starts out really, really small. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree. And so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. And you're like, what is that about? Well, a couple things. Let's go back. So the kingdom of heaven, he's describing what's going to go on during the mystery kingdom delay of the kingdom for Israel. And what he is saying is, in Christendom, okay, Christendom, notice the word I'm using. I'm not using the word church, I'm using Christendom. That during the mystery kingdom age, there'll be a thing called Christendom, which means that there will be people who claim loyalty to the Messiah, but are really not. And he talked about that in the wheat and the tares, right? That there would be a division. So Christendom wouldn't be pure. The church wouldn't be pure. The real church, the remnant church, is always made up of real believers, yes, but Christendom is not made up of all believers. It's made up of unbelievers and believers, but the unbelieving element claims to be believers, but are not, if that makes sense. So what he is saying is, during Christendom's reign, it'll start out very small, as it started with 12 apostles. Christendom started with 12 apostles, and they started Christianity, right? What we know of today. And it started out small, but when it got connected to the state, which is Rome at the time, it exploded. It exploded in growth, right? That was one of the benefits of it being married to the state and not being persecuted, is it actually spread all through the empire and basically controlled the whole world. You know, you're talking about North Africa, all of Europe almost, and then you got the Middle East, the Near East, all in that area. So the whole entire Mediterranean world, it was Christianized at this point. So it became very large, very large. So it goes from very tiny 12 apostles to this large behemoth, okay, that exists. So he's saying that's what happened during this era. And then he goes on, so which a man sowed in his field, that's sowing into the field, into the world, which is least of all the seeds. And then he says, so once it got big, he says, so the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Now, if you don't understand the first parable, which is the parable of the soils, you won't understand this parable. So if you're going to understand the mystery kingdom parables, go one at a time and go first one first, second, then third, then fourth, then fifth, and each one will build on each other and explain the next one. So if you get to this one, a lot of people will say, well, I don't understand the birds. What's the deal with the birds nesting in its branches? Big deal. Well, you have to go back to the first parable, because in the first parable of the soils, he will explain what the birds are. Remember in the first parable, he says, a man went out to sow, and he sowed on the ground, on the road, and a bird came and took it up and stole that seed that he had put on the ground. Remember that? But when Messiah explains that parable, he's basically saying the parable of the bird is an enemy. Is an enemy. It's satanic. It's demonic that takes that seed away from someone. Satan comes in and takes it away from them. He steals it. And so what the birds are emissaries of Satan. That's how you interpret that first, the parable of the soils. Well, okay, so if I understand that he's interpreted the birds in such manner, then I take his interpretation and I have to apply it then to the rest of the parables. And so when I'm looking at this one, okay, so Christendom will grow very large at this time, but it will have a problem of birds coming in and nesting in the branches. The birds being satanic emissaries that are sent to nest in its branches. And this behemoth called Christendom is so large, it's easy for these birds to get in. There's nothing keeping them out. They just come, and it's a natural process. It's grown so large that the birds come in. Now, obviously, you can do deduction with unbelievers can't spot satanic emissaries. They can't spot it, right? So the primary fault is these unbelievers letting them in. The other fault obviously could be not watchful believers, Laodicean believers that are lackadaisical in their walk, and so they allow the birds to come in too. But so what Jesus is suggesting is saying, look, you're going to have enemy infiltration inside the church, inside of Christendom. And at this time in history, it's one of the biggest infiltrations we have ever seen by the Babylonian cult. And so that's why this parable makes sense that it's connected to the Pergamum parable. Okay. So just a little history, not a lot, but Constantine unites the church and state, making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in 378 AD. Worldly and unholy alliance start occurring. This unholy alliance produces great external growth, but false doctrines are now embedding themselves within the church as paganism infiltrates. So that's just a historical thing. So one of the interesting things about this place of Pergamum is it was full of all kinds of pagan temples, no doubt about that. But one of the most venerated pagan temple was the temple to Zeus. And obviously in the pagan pantheon, in the Greek pantheon, he was the head of the gods, right? So when you look at Greek mythology, or you look at Aztec or Mayan or any of these other ancient types of religion where they have polytheism, really what they're looking at is Genesis chapter 6, right? That's what they're looking at. And then you have, minotaurs, centaurs, and half animals, half humans, stuff like that. Well, that's really a corruption of Genesis 6, what happened there with the Nephilim. And you were having, half-breed, fallen angels, humans. And it appears from ancient cultures that the angels went even as far as mixing animals with humans, and that's where you get these ancient myths of, the head of a like an eagle and a man's body, and all kinds of weird things were happening. Because all the ancient myths have them in it. It's not just the Greeks. It's almost every ancient myth. They have a commonality in all the ancient myths. They have a demigod fight, like a Clash of the Titans type of thing, which is Genesis 6. They have where the gods come down and mate with humans. That's another part. They have sacrifice always involved. Blood sacrifice are always involved. They have a flood story that's always involved. And trying to think of something else. And typically, in the ancient myths, the top god, they'll always say, well, he went to sleep. He kind of left and let these other diminutive gods take over and run the rest of the show. That is across the board. Across the board. So when you put all the ancient stories together, what you start realizing is there's some truth to them all. They can't all be wrong. They're all having a flood story. They're all having a sacrifice story. They're all having a demigod. Okay. So in the Greek mythology, he had all these temples to these different gods, and obviously it's a corruption of worshiping the fallen angels as Nimrod was doing at the Tower of Babel. Okay, but for some reason, this temple to Zeus was really venerated, as he was the top god. Okay, and you can see this kind of in a replica of what Pergamum actually looked like in the day that this church was there in 95 AD. Artist rendition, that's kind of what it looked like as you would have approached it. And anyway, it was excavated by the Germans. And the Germans excavated it and took it to Berlin. So today you have the temple to Zeus, which is in Berlin today. And you can go visit it, and you can see, obviously, people are visiting it. And they're like, okay, what's the big deal? Well, some theologians say, and again, this is all theory, that this is the seat of Satan. I mean, that this temple, even though it says that it is in Pergamum, that this is the actual seat right here. That this is the seat of Satan, the temple to Zeus. Interesting. The Zeppelin Colosseum, I think it's the Colosseum, it was called the Zeppelin. Obviously, the Nazi Germany's had their things there. But the Zeppelin Colosseum is actually patterned off of the Greek god Zeus's temple. And there it is again. And obviously, you know Nazi Germany. So the theory goes, the theory, okay? Please understand, I'm talking theory, that Satan's throne moved to Germany. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. All I know is this: there's a lot of weird stuff coming out of Germany. And again, I'm just throwing it out there. You chew on it. I'm not saying it's dogmatic, but you need to think about something. I will say this. That the western leg of Daniel's metallic man is in Western Germany and Western Europe, okay? And the eastern leg is in Russia. We know that from Daniel's prediction of the two-legged of the metallic man, and then we know from history that once the Muslims took Constantinople, then the eastern leg of the Roman Empire went to Russia. They moved up to Russia. Then we know from history that when Rome was going down, then it moved to under Charlemagne to France, and then after Charlemagne, I think it was Otto the First, I believe, moved it to Germany, and he called it the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, and as you know, what do they call the kings in Germany? Kaisers. What's Kaiser another name for? Caesar, thank you. And then in Russia, they call the kings what? Tsars, which is another name for what? Caesar. So you have two Caesars. You have the western and eastern leg. So I will say Germany is the western leg, or at least Western Europe is the western leg, and that's what's the fight over right now. And the western leg wants globalism, and the eastern leg wants what? Russian domination. Okay, and so it's a fight between the two legs, and I already know who wins the fight. It's the globalists win the fight. Okay, so back to Germany. So this is where the theory is, that Satan's throne was there, infiltrated the church at that time, and I'll talk about the infiltration, but then it moves to Germany. Now, maybe that's there, or maybe what's happening in Germany is because it's the western leg of Daniel's metallic man. Either way, there's some weird stuff that comes out of Germany, and I think we all need to understand this. So when you do some history on Germany, even before Nazi Germany, Germany was the first to start doing transgender surgeries. You knew that, right? They were the first ones experimenting with transgenderism. They had a whole undercurrent in Germany of homosexuality and all kinds of pedophilia. I mean, it was crazy. And one of Hitler's things was he was going to get all that under control. And a lot of the Germans were tired of that, right? This is crazy, man, with the transgender, the homosexuality, lesbianism, it was out of control. And Germany was looking for a strong man to do that, and he said he would do that. The problem is he lied to them. He surrounded himself with SS troops that are totally homosexual and pedophilers, and they would molest the Nazi youth that they brought into the regime. It was totally wicked, totally messed up. So you have rampant homosexuality, you have rampant lesbianism, you have rampant transsexualism. I mean, I've seen even pictures of these German soldiers dressed up like women with lipstick and all kinds. I mean, it's just like, this is like 1931 or whatever in Germany. And now we're having the problem of transgenderism now, or transvestitism, right? Well, they were doing the surgeries back then, even in Germany. So you had some weird stuff coming out of there. The other weird stuff that came out of Germany is rocket technology. That was like 90 years ahead of what we knew. So all of a sudden, Germany is developing rockets, and it's the same technology that we're actually using today. Nothing's changed. We're using German technology from the 1930s today. Nothing's changed. So how did they get so advanced in their technology? Okay, and then, as you know, Operation Paperclip, we brought them all over to America and to develop our bombs, right? Okay, Oppenheimer and all that other stuff. So we brought them over there in Operation Paperclip. A lot of NASA was involved from German scientists that came from Operation Paperclip, along with other kinds of scientists. And we brought what's his name, Einstein as well, right? And Einstein's German, you recall. So we brought all these German scientists over and to develop our technology and our rockets and stuff like that. But here's a weird thing. Where did it originate? It didn't originate in the United States. The technology originated in Germany. The transgenderism originated in Germany. And then after that, then Nazi Germany erupts, and then you have the anti-Semitism that erupts, right? Killing the Jews and disabled people and mentally handicapped people and elderly people. So it's a complete depopulation program, right? Along with being anti-Semitic. So I'm telling you this because when you study Nazi Germany, or you study the beginnings of Germany, there's some weird stuff going on here. Very satanic, very evil, very demonic, and I don't know how to explain it other than a spiritual way. Why is Germany producing so much junk that starts infecting the entire planet? So let's play a little game. So who is the head of the World Economic Forum? And where is he from? Thank you. He's not from China. He's not from Bolivia. He's not from South America. He's from Germany. I don't think that's an accident. I really don't. So we see Germany and they're, what they do today, and like they can't even ever make a good decision. I mean, they destroy their economy by going green, all stupid, moves like that. And a lot of them, like Angela Merkel, they don't have kids. Have you noticed that? A lot of the leaders don't get married, or they don't have kids. It's a weird phenomenon that's going on in Europe. Weird. And no one really knows how to explain that. But all that to say, I would say this biblically. Where Germany is in Western Europe, there's where the western leg of Daniel's metallic man is. I know who wins. We go to globalism. That's the next phase. So I know they win over Russia. I know they do, because that's what the scripture says. Russia will not take over the world. The globalists will. That's the western leg. And the funny thing about it is when you look at these countries over there in Europe, and there's hardly a vestige of Christianity left. There's hardly anything. It's just mainly Muslim religion and stuff like that. And it's what we call spiritually a burnt-out district. There's not a lot going on there spiritually. And don't get me wrong. There's plenty of remnant believers out there, but they're few and far between. They're real small, right? Churches are dead. They don't have any pastors. That's one of the problems. So there's a problem there. But yet, this is the area where all this stuff is coming from. So maybe the theory is correct. I don't know. At least I'll say it's the metallic leg, but maybe the theory is that Satan's throne did move there. He seems to be operating out of there. I don't think anyone in this room would not say that what Hitler did to the Jews was completely satanic, because you can't explain it any other way, that what he did was satanic. I mean, this guy was demon-possessed. He had to be, man, to think like that, right, and to do such things like that. And so, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff going on there. But anyway, you can study that for yourself in history. Let's go back to what started happening in the church. So, with Nimrod, Semiramis, and her son Tammuz, what started developing is they started going under different names. And they infiltrated into the church. And in the other false religions out there, Semiramis and Tammuz became Aphrodite and Eros in Greek, Venus and Cupid in Rome, and then the Madonna and Child in Roman Catholicism. So this mother-child cult that came from Babylon entered into the church, okay? And so the mother-child cult can be seen in Egypt. It can be seen in Babylon, Greece, like I'm saying. It's all over. It's just in different names. But there's always the Madonna-child cult. Well, it's Semiramis, and it is Tammuz. It's not Jesus, it's Tammuz. And again, Tammuz is a counterfeit to the resurrection of the Messiah, right? Because he was killed by animals and resurrected, right? And then the worship of his mother is Semiramis. And guess what they called Semiramis? Does anyone know? The Queen of Heaven. But who do they call Mary in Catholicism? The Queen of Heaven. So, I mean, I know the Catholic apologists. I know what they say. I grew up Catholic. I know what the Catholic apologists say. They'll tell you there's no connection whatsoever that you're making. Well, I find it ironic that you call her the same name as the Babylonians called Semiramis. I find it funny, Catholic, that you believe that she never had sinned. You also, I find it against the Bible that you say that she was assumed into heaven bodily and never died. So she's never has sinned. She was assumed bodily, never died. What do you got going on here? You have a female deity. I'm sorry. That is not the Mary of the Bible. You have Semiramis in your midst. Now, the thing about that, you can call her any name you want. But the function is, if you worship a female deity, you're worshiping Semiramis. Or you're worshiping Aphrodite. Or you're worshiping Venus. Or whatever name you want to give this female deity, that's who you're worshiping. And I don't know about you. I mean, some of you are Catholic. I watched people at the Catholic Church sit there and worship Mary like there was no tomorrow. And I know maybe our Catholic friends would say, well, we don't do that. Really, you're on your hands and knees, kissing a statue to her feet, crowning her. What are you talking about? And saying that she's the mediator between you and God. That's crazy. That's heresy. And so I'm sorry. I mean, you're dealing with an ex-Catholic, so I have a real disdain for Catholicism. But any Catholic out there, you've got to answer that. You may not do it, but why does half the world of Catholicism worship Mary? How come most of the Central America and South America and Mexico are petitioning the Vatican to get her as a co-mediatrix with Christ and a co-redemptrix with Christ? Why are they doing that? Oh, because you let that happen. You didn't correct it. That's your problem. You didn't correct it. You say you only venerate her, but yet you let millions of people worship her. Well, that's the whole idea. So here's how the Babylonian cult works. The Babylonian cult works by spreading through ecumenicism, by communalism. Let that just sink in. The Babylonian cult religion spreads by ecumenicism and communalism. Believe it or not, it wasn't Marx and Engels that came up with communism or Marxism, by the way. It was the Jesuits. It was the Catholic Church. Because the way the Jesuits functioned is they functioned ecumenically. So their mode of operandi was to go into an area and try to convert the people there, but allow them to keep their religion. And at the same time, as they kept their religion, adopt the Madonna and child worship into their religion, much like Hinduism, where you just continue to add gods to your list. That was how the what did I say? Jesuits, thank you. The Jesuits created this ecumenicism. Now, you've heard of ecumenicism, right? Okay, where all the religions come together, you sing Kumbaya, and you work towards common cause goals. Okay, that's straight out of Catholicism, straight out of Babylon, okay? Now, the second aspect, so you got ecumenicism being used. The second aspect is communalism. Okay, what do you mean? Well, once we establish a commune, then everyone will play their part in the commune and help the church in that area of commune. And basically we'll turn the inhabitants into slaves for us, and they will work for us, and we will be the elite at the top, the priests, and they will serve us because we will give them salvation. We will give them redemption by serving us. Let's get a mic here to Bill. Let's get a mic over there too. Does that sound familiar?
Is that what they're doing in Dubai with Christianity, Islam, and the Jewish, the Chrislam?
The Chrislam, yeah. It is what they're doing. That's called ecumenicism. We're going to hook up with the Abrahamic faith and come together and unite as one. That's Jesuits. That's the thing. So the Jesuits then come up with communism. Okay? So Marx and Engels didn't come up with it. Lenin didn't come up with it. Stalin didn't come up with it. None of those guys. It came from the Catholics. But it didn't come from the Catholics. It came from Babylon.
Pastor, you were talking about the 3 legs, and I get that, and I agree with that. But I have been thinking that the seat, this is me, the seat of Satan is in Tehran.
Could be.
I don't
Could
know.
be.
I just see so much evil coming out of there.
Well, and here's the thing. Wherever it's at right now is everyone's guess. But I know where it ends up, and you do too. Where will Satan's final throne be? Babylon. Because that's where the Antichrist will have his throne. So I don't know where it's at. Maybe it's in America. I don't know. It could be in L.A. I don't know. I think it is there maybe, right? Or San Francisco, right? San Francisco probably a better bet. Yeah. I think there would be good. But, it's anyone's guess where that's at. But I do know where it ends up. The Bible says where it ends up. And it's destroyed there as well. Yeah, Richard.
Would it be fair to say that the reason why Satan wanted Moses' body for the same thing that's happening here with Semiramis?
It's very possible. That's one theory, Richard, that they would have worshipped his body.
He had 5 million followers, even though they wanted to kill him too, but at the same time, to worship him, to get him away from...
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the theories because of the ancestor worship was really high. In the ancient world, man, that was a big deal. And you think, well, before you know it, instead of, hey, we have this ancestor, and say your ancestor, we go back to Adam, it turned into actually worshiping Adam. That's what happened. And so you're like, well, that sounds weird. Wait a second. Go to the Pacific Rim, and what's going on in the Pacific Rim? Is ancestor worship, right? I mean, so people think, well, that's too far-fetched. No, they're doing it today. They do it today, and they're worshiping ancestors, right? In the Asian culture, that's really a big problem, is ancestor worship, right? So it's not too far. So it's still with us today. And, you go into some of these places and they have fruit up there on the table for them and all kinds of weird. They'll give them coins at their burial for them in the afterlife. It's all kinds of weird stuff, but it was part of ancestor worship. So, yeah, you're right. That could have been there. Okay. So let me end on this real quick because we're going to continue this journey down because it gets really weird, right? And but what I want you to see is how fast that things started developing, and all of a sudden the church is practicing pagan practices, and you're like, where did this come from? You know, where did the prayers for the dead come from? Where did this wearing Sunday best come from? Well, this came from paganism. It came from Babylon. But again, let me end on this. Back to the Jesuits. We have a Jesuit priest right now, right? He's very ecumenical, isn't he? Yes, right? Very, very. He goes against Catholic dogma because that's the nature of a Jesuit. A Jesuit is like a chameleon. They change to fit the scene. Okay? And why they're doing it is ecumenicism. Okay, so when you start studying communism and Marxism and socialism, you can trace it back to the Jesuits. It was the Jesuits, and the number one guy is Tapernelli. Okay, he's a Jesuit priest who basically invented communism. So Marx and Engels got their concepts from Tapernelli, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So I'll give it more to you next week. But communism came straight out of Catholicism, which came straight out of the Babylonian religious cult. So my political statement is communism is a religion because I can trace its origins all the way back to Babylon and to Nimrod. Interesting, huh?